let's dive right into it. So drone imports. What can you do in cmBuilder once you do have a drone import, right? So the idea of a drone scan is that you're gonna produce a accurate representation of that location of the area that you're working on, right? So in cmBuilder, for you to use that information, you have to split that into three types of information, right? So one is for you to improve the shape of your terrain according to your drone scan. So we need to have the terrain isolated in one single file. You can improve the texture of the map, the background of the map. So that's the orthomosaic projection. So basically, it's a flat picture that you're going to project down the ground and use that. And the surrounding area, right? Other elements that are in your surrounding, like your buildings, like trees and things like that. So for that, we would do pretty much the same process on the first one, but we will isolate the buildings, right? So we will focus today on these two because they are the most complexest one. And keep in mind that for drone imports, we have to assess what is the available data before we even start like thinking about importing that data inside cmBuilder. So what is that you have available in your hands? Is it a point cloud or is it a mesh? A mesh is basically a surface that has a texture in it or cannot or can or cannot have a may or may not have a texture, right? So it is the information that you have does the textures are they correctly mapped. So sometimes the textures are not very well mapped with the geometry, so it might give you some weird results. Is the point cloud clean? So just recently we were working with a customer that had a point cloud that they wanted to import inside cmBuilder, and they didn't notice in the beginning that the point cloud was duplicated, right? So there was like an offset that was creating some weird meshes and some weird geometries. So usually also like you're working with very big files. So usually point clouds can go from 1 gig to 15 gigs. So like it's always like a process of if working with them. And if it's a complex area, you're probably going to spend a little bit more time tuning up that file, right? So with is the process that we need to do. So basically, we're gonna take that drone scan from a drone software. You can use like any drone software that you have available, like Pix4D, like Drone Deploy, and so many others. And the idea is that you're gonna take that file and you're going to export that file into an OBJ or an FBX file. So this is a geometry file that has a texture like the one that you're seeing over here in the picture. And the next step is for you to separate your buildings in your terrain. So we will need to find a way to process this file, to take your buildings and put them into one bucket, take your vehicles, your trees in another bucket, but most importantly, to have a terrain in a isolated mesh, okay, isolated geometry. So there are a couple ways that we can do that, and this also depends which type of data you have available. So if it's a point cloud, if it's a mesh scan, you will use certain types of software. But I just like I'm showing a couple of options over here. So free options, free softwares that you can download and use right now are Blender, Cloud Compare, and Scene. You might have others, but these are the most common ones that I usually use. And paid softwares, we have Autodesk, Recap Pro, and Recap Photo. These are probably the most common ones that I've seen people using the most. But also, I know that Agisoft has a paid version where it automatically classifies the points by their what they are. Like if the point cloud you have like a specific set of points that is a terrain, that is vehicles, that are buildings, and so on. And also Point Fuse is another software that creates a geometry out of point clouds. Okay, so today we're going to focus on Blender. And the reason why is because Blender, even though it's not the most automatic and simple software to use, is the one that will give you more customization capabilities. Okay, so for to use Blender, we have some steps. I'm not gonna share these steps at the moment. These are gonna it's more for my own notes over here. But basically, we have a set of steps that we use, and you could look for cheat sheets online that will help you with like the main navigation interface instructions about Blender, right? But I'm gonna open Blender right now, and once you open a project in Blender, this is what it looks like. So it will always come with a camera, cube, and a light. And this is not supposed to be a Blender tutorial, so I'm gonna go with the most like the overall idea of like the software. So I'm gonna select all of these elements in here, and I'm gonna delete them because I don't need them. And I'm gonna import a file that is gonna be an OBJ file that's coming from a drone scan, right? So if I go and find that information over here, let me go back and go into my workshop Blended Terrain. So I'm going to select an OBJ file, and every OBJ file that comes from a drone scan will also have an MTL file and several texture files with it. So you have to have them in the same folder once you open them. So what I did over here, I imported that, and you can see that the file is flipped. So I'm gonna delete this, and I'm gonna import that again just to show you what is the difference. So if you go into OBJ and you select that OBJ file, in here you have the forward axis and up axis. So let's just change the forward axis to Y, and the up axis will automatically change to Z. And when you import that, you see that the file is now going to be imported in the right shape. Okay, so oops, 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 I'm doing things wrong over here with my PowerPoint. Let me keep this on the side. Yes, so basically we're gonna do a couple of checks over here. So I'm gonna select that mesh, and I'm gonna go to object and set the origin, and I'm gonna move the geometry to the origin. So this is gonna move so the geometry is set up to the origin, and I'm gonna click on this fourth sphere over here on the side, because that is gonna show me the textures that are mapped to that geometry. So this will really help me understand what is a building, what is a part of the terrain, what is a car, what is planters, and so on and so forth, right? So it's going to take a couple seconds, and it will show up like this, right? So now what we need to do is look at the tree structure that you see over here on the side. We're going to right click and create new collections. So I'm going to create a collection for buildings and a collection for vehicles. Okay, vehicles. And the one over here on the top, I'm going to keep that as a terrain. So basically, this will be my buckets in which I'm going to separate this geometry. So to separate the geometry, we're going to click on that, and we're going to click over here and go into edit mode. So this will expose all the vertices of that structure, as you see over here. And we also going to click on the X-ray selection, which is this button over here on the top. That means that every point that my selection touches will be selected, right? So we have some different selection styles. So one is to click and drag to select a bunch of parts, and these will select all those those vertices over there. But if you click on this selection box and hold, you will see that there are other types of selections, and we're going to use the lasso selection. Also, I'm going to click on the Z sphere over here to snap my view from the top. So their navigation, it's very simple. So if you hold shift and click the middle mouse button, you'll be able to navigate on Blender. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold shift and draw around the building. And this is going to select all of those parts. And then I'm going to hold shift again and then draw around the building over here. And this will add to that selection. So if you see now, that whole building is highlighted. So I'm going to right click on that, click on separate, and separate by selection. So now in my tree structure over here, you're going to see that this mesh is going to be split into two. And the one that is selected is going to change the view because it's gonna the one that is selected is going to be separated. It's not going to be on edit mode. It's going to be in object mode, and the other one is going to be on edit mode. And I'm not sure why this is taking that long to complete, but at least it was completed. Okay, so you see now I have a mesh that represents this whole part, and the other one that represents this part. So I'm going to click on this one and drag it to the building group. And now this mesh is part of that building collections. And I prefer to work with it like turned off so I can focus on the things that I haven't yet selected. So I'm going to do another building over here. I'm going to hit my left click, separate, selection. And again, this is going to do the same thing. It's going to take this out, and I'm going to take this one and put it over here. Okay. So let's consider that I already did this correctly with the buildings. I could do a fine tuning by selecting more parts over here if I wanted, right? But let's move on to the vehicles now. I'm going to just go back to my Z selection, and then I'm going to zoom in and then do the same selection now with these vehicles. Right click, separate, selection, and then we will take now the new mesh and we're going to put this inside vehicles, right? So once you're done with this process, what's going to happen is that you're going to have your mesh with a lot of openings, and this is fine depending on the sizes of those openings. That's not a big problem because cmBuilder is smart enough to fill those holes with some parameters. Okay. Other things that you can do at this stage as well is to either reduce the quality of some of these meshes of these groups or smooth it out a little bit. So if I go back into object mode over here, you can see all of those meshes, and then I can select the vehicles over here. For example, if I want to isolate them, I can isolate by turning them on and off. And using this one as an example, I'm going to select it over here, and I can go into my edit mode, right click on this, and select a bunch of these parts, select it all, right click, and use this smooth vertices over here. So this has some parameters that you can change to define how this is going to be smoothing those edges to create like a more more linear like shape. Another thing that you can do to reduce the quality of these images if you want to like save some processing is to click on this modifier properties over here and add a decimation property. So in here you can put in like a ratio. Let's say if I put like 0.5, the quality of this mesh now is gonna be reduced, right? So you see now it's 0.5. If I put 0.1, the quality is going to reduce even more, right? So you can play around with this to kind of like reduce the amount of points that you have, the amount of triangles, and make your whole mesh a little bit more suitable for a web browser. Okay. So these are a little bit of an instructions about how to do that, how to separate them, how to process them a little bit more. But when you're ready with your terrain, the most important part over here is to have a terrain isolated like I have it over here. Imagine that I did this process to remove all of these cars. So the most important part of this process is to select the mesh that you want, go into File, Export a GOB file. So this GOB file, you can put it in anywhere, but the idea is that you're gonna click on the include and do only the selected objects and click on transform and deactivate this Y up. Okay, and when you do that, now you have a GLB file that will represent your terrain. Of course, this one over here, I didn't finish the processing because it would take me some time to separate everything. But basically, what you can do now is if you go into cmBuilder, you can take a, let's see, I'm going to take like any random scenario over here, and I can go into my buildings, import a mesh, and then I can upload that file that I just created, this one. This is going to take some time because the file is quite big. But once I imported that file, if it's representing just my terrain, I could come here in my project setup, click on custom terrain, click on terrain, create a terrain from a mesh. I would select that mesh, and then my terrain would fit to that elevation. So this is like something that I already covered in another workshop. That's why I'm not showing too much details over here. But today is just to show you that there is a capability for you to do this process with Blender, and I do that a lot for a couple customers as well. So there are other
Can I
tools.
can I cut you
Yep.
off too? So just one thing to know that the GLB is it's a bit of an obscure file format. Actually, a lot of softwares export it to it, but you just probably haven't heard much about it. We do the next phase is going to be to take an FBX for the exact same thing. So I
Mhm.
just wanted to communicate that the GLB
Yep.
is kind of like a step one. Step two is to skip a step and just go FBX and be able to do the same thing. So I just wanted everyone to know that's in the roadmap and hopefully coming soon.
Awesome. Exactly. So yeah, so this process is just to get to the point where we have a shape of the terrain isolated and everything else also isolated. And then you can import those things to have them as your references for surroundings better than the white shapes that are generated automatically over here in Builder. So if you want better shapes than this, you can simply isolate your buildings and then bring them over in cmBuilder and position them correctly. Okay, cool. Awesome. So going to the next step of this process is